My name is Jonathan Drax, and I will be doing on the arcade to home port comparison number 2 on Street Fighter 2 The World Champion. So a little briefing on the game. The game was developed and published by Capcom. The arcade version was released in March 7th in Japan in 1991, and worldwide sometime later in March in 1991. The home port version, which would be the SNES, the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, that version was released on June 10th, 1992, and in North America, it was released July 15th, 1992. The genre of the video game is a single-player or multiplayer fighter game, and across all the releases of this video game, 15.5 million units sold. From arcade to the Commodore 64 to the SNES to one of the Ataris, and there's like 8 other consoles that it got released on. Now, the arcade version uses a CP system. It was the chip that Capcom had made for fighting games, and this is one of the 14 titles that have used the CP system. Now, the CPU is a Motorola 68000 that runs at 10 megahertz. The display was a raster 384 by 224 pixels horizontally and could render 4096 colors. The input was an 8-way joystick and from 3 to 6 buttons. The gameplay of the arcade version starts off with an introduction that contains 2 guys that are about to fight, and one guy punches the other, and then it transitions into the title screen. The sound and everything is crisp. It's pleasing to the ear. The graphics, though, are a little blurry, but I would attribute that to it being a fast-paced fighting game. And the music itself and the soundtracks are very energetic and upbeat, and I would assume it was composed that way because this video game was meant to be amongst other arcade machines. Now, the sprites of them are actually larger than the Homeport version. The colors are also more smooth and kind of creamy, like pastelish. And just like arcade games are, it's less personal. You are competing on a leaderboard with other people that play that machine. The arcade version contains extra sound effects versus the SNES version. One of them being when you fight one of the Indian guy, and his stage is elephants, and the elephants make sound in the arcade version. Now, the SNES version is the specs that is used for that is a CPU Ryko 5A22, and the video resolution, the standards were 256 by 224, or a 512 by 224, or a 256 by 239, or a 512 by 339. The audio chips were a Sony SPC700 and Sony DSP, and it could render 32 kilohertz, and it was a 16-bit stereo. The gameplay version of this one is vastly different from the arcade version. There is no intro. The only intro to the SNES version starts off with it saying Capcom, and then it brings on the title of Street Fighter 2, the World Warrior. The sound, though, is deeper, more bass. It has more bass to it. It's more vibrant, though, and some of the soundtrack is different from the arcade version. The arcade version has a very generic tone to it, but it also includes extra sounds. The SNES does remove some sounds, like in this picture here, when Ken fights Chun-Li. On the SNES, it's more Oriental style music versus on the arcade, it's a more upbeat fighting arcade, sounds. The SNES also contains the settings to change up the gameplay. You can increase the difficulty or you can decrease the difficulty. It also contains its own leaderboard, but it containing a leaderboard on it being a Homeport system, a home console. It's more personal, I want to beat my high score. I want to see if I can do better, or hey, my friend played it and I want to beat his high score. Now, this SNES version does contain an intro gameplay clip, which kind of shows you how the game's played, what to expect from the video game. The colors too are very bulky. They're bulkier. The sprites are a little bit smaller, and that's most likely going to compensate that it's on a smaller screen compared to on the arcade screen. They are more vibrant. They're deeper colors compared to the arcade version. The arcades are very creamy and seems more fluid, while the SNES version is more rigid and feels more sharp. Many of the differences, though, comparing them to the same, as you can see with these two pictures, the color's different. It also seems like everything's just more enlarged. The artwork too, the introduction artwork where it shows the two fighters are different in the arcade version. Chun-Li is wearing a yellow outfit versus the SNES where she's wearing a blue outfit, which ties more closely to what you're fighting. They do also have very similar things. When you start bringing down their health, the music speeds up to give you a rush and kind of give like a pseudo anxiety, like, oh, I'm about to win or I'm about to lose. The SNES, though, does remove some sounds. When you fight the Russian, it removes some of the after beats, which I would assume is the percussion stuff, versus on the arcade where it's included in. These would be the citations of the arcade hardware, the SNES hardware, and the gameplay.